Good morning, Year 12. Welcome back to the summer term. So we just need to finish off a wee bit of the spec. So then we've got one unit covered. So I'm not promising that we're going to get everything done before the exams, but we'll have the vast majority of it completed. So for this week, I want you to have a look at report writing, which is what we're going to have a look at today, and then peer review, which I want you to have a look at for your second lesson this week. So the spec says, as it says on the slide, you need to understand how a psychologist would report their research in a sort of conventional academic means. So most, as with any other sort of scientific research, what academic researchers do is that when they undertake their studies, they then write them up and they get them published in various academic journals that exist. So the example there is that the one that I've given you is the Journal of Evolutionary Psychology. There are many others that are around. So I'm just going to talk you through what the sections of a report would look like after a psychologist has published their research, and then I'm going to show you an example of Milgram's report so you can see the sort of structure that was followed. I'll email you this as well, so you've got everything that you need. Okay, so that's what report writing's about, and that's what we need to learn and understand. So I'm just going to talk you through the main sections. Okay, so the first section of an academic report is the abstract. Okay, and that is usually just a summary paragraph at the start of the report. Usually psychologists would write this last, even though it's the first thing on the report. It's usually the last thing that you write. And the reason that is because it summarises the whole research from beginning to end. So it's about half a page typically, perhaps even less, and it summarises the process of the research from beginning to end. So when you are looking for stuff as a researcher, you want to know what other research has been done. Then when you search in academic sort of online references, there's many search engines. You might have come across some of the ones that that we've used in school, like Scholar. What it searches on is the abstract. So it's a really quick way of determining what the research is about and if it's relevant to what you want. So that's a really useful skill, because when you go to university, if you're asked to go to first-hand research, you'll have to trawl through a number of abstracts to find the research that you want. So that's the first section. The second section is the introduction, and that is a literature review basically, and it's introducing the concepts of what's the sort of basis for the research. So it will talk about previous research that has been done on a subject area. So for example, Milgram in his journal article, which I'll show you, will talk about previous research that would have been done on things like obedience prior to his own research. So it's sort of explaining previous research, the rationale, your thinking, okay? So it's a sort of background to the research, and it ends with a statement of your sort of hypotheses. Okay, so at the end of the introduction, what you should have is a clear statement of an intent about what you're expecting to find, and usually your null hypotheses. Okay, so that's the last bit of the introduction. And then the bulk of the report is usually the methodology, which might run into pages. And the reason why that is because other researchers can replicate it. So it has to be, shipshape. It has to have everything that you've done minute by minute, second by second, so that someone else could come along and replicate it. So it's extremely detailed methodology, as you'll see from the Milgram experiment that I'll show you. Okay. Then you have your results section. So researchers will write up after they've done their experiment what exactly they found. So it will have the main findings, usually something like the results from an inferential statistical test, maybe some charts and graphs, maybe a summary table of results. So that will go into the results section. Any sort of rough calculations, any raw data wouldn't go there. Okay, it would go in the appendices section. So the results is sort of summary headline statistics that you found from your research. That's followed by the discussion. This is a really important part of the journal article, the psychological report. And here what researchers will do is discuss their findings. Okay, so they'll talk about what the research discovered, what that means, what the implications for theory might be. And very often they evaluate their research at the same time. They might sort of pick holes in their own research to say, you know, this might have been a confounding variable, you know, this should have been addressed, and they might make recommendations for improving it for next time round, and maybe sort of implications for sort of future research, what might be good areas to pursue. That's followed by the references, and that's usually what all you'll see, because you don't often see the appendix in some research reports. So for many reports, they will end on the reference or your bibliography, and there you have to report every single source that you've used in the production of your research. Okay, so any journals that you've accessed, any books that you've used, any internet sort of resources that you've researched, and that has to be reported in a conventional way. Okay, so I'll talk about that in a second. And then the appendix, as I mentioned earlier, or appendices, is where anything rough would go. So any raw calculations, any initial raw data, any instructions that were issued to your participants would go in that sort of suppository for anything that doesn't sort of fit the other sections, but would be relevant just to sort of cast your eyes over, just to get a flavour for the research. So you need to know all of those sections. Okay, so I'm just going to show you an example of what an academic journal would look like. So this is Stanley Milgram's original research. Okay, so that bit you're looking at there is the abstract. Okay, and then as we scroll through, these ones haven't got the titles until you get on to the method, but that bit there is your introduction. So it's talking about the context. So he's making reference there to the sort of slaughter of the Jews during the Second World War by the Nazis. So that was the sort of basis for his research and why the Nazis did what they did. And then you've got quite a detailed section on his methodology. Okay, so if anyone wanted to repeat it, that they could. Okay, and then you get on to the still going through the procedure. Then you get on to the results section. Okay, further along. Eventually, we're still on the method. Oh, there we are. Results. Okay, so you've got quite detail of his results. He's got a table in there, you know, sort of headline about, you know, what points do people get to when they were shocking their participants, and then the discussion. Okay, what all this means, an interpretation of the results, what might have had an impact on the research, you know, self-evaluation, and then recommendations about what might be done in future, and then the reference section. So all the sections all the resources that Milgram used would be listed there. okay, in his journal. So I'd have a look at that as well, just to get a flavour for what it would actually look like. Okay, so back to the research. Okay, back to the research methodology. The other thing that you need to do, and what I'd like you to have a look at today, is how to reference appropriately. Now, this is a really good skill to have, because when you go to university, you will need to be able to sort of reference all the sources that you've used. Any research, any assignment that you'll do at university will have to be referenced. Okay, you have to do it, because if you don't do it, you could be accused of plagiarism. So it is convention to list every piece of academic research you've used in the production of your assignment or in your research. So the method that's used typically by most institutions is known as the Harvard system of reference, and named after the university. Okay, and there are conventions to it. It is the done thing. You are offering thanks to the other academics for the utilisation of their work, and again, you need to do it to avoid plagiarism. So plagiarism means sort of lifting other people's academic work, claiming it as your own. And that can happen when you haven't referenced it. Okay, so universities take that really seriously. So it's good practice to be able to reference. So the conventions, thankfully, just for reasons of time, because you can reference journals, you can reference internet sites, you can reference books. Thankfully for us, we only need to know how to reference a journal and to reference a book, and you might be asked to do this in an exam. So this one is for referencing books. Okay, that's the full reference underneath. So that's what you're aiming for when you reference. So as you can see, what you need to do is state the author. Okay, so their surname comes first, followed by their initials, the date the book was published, okay, and then the full title of the book that was utilised, okay. New York refers to where it was published, okay, originally, and century of the publisher. So you go name, date, title, where it was published, and the publisher, okay. If you've just used certain pages of the book, you would put that in at the end. But that's a sort of typical convention for how you would reference a book. Okay. If there was a number of authors, then what you would do is usually with books, they are referenced by who has contributed the most to the book. So the sort of lead author or the editor would be the first name, followed by the others. Okay, and then for journals, similar kind of format, okay, but there's a bit more information included. So here, okay, you've got the names of the authors. Again, these have been done. So Grant, yeah, who you've looked at, is the sort of top researcher. He's the key one. Yeah, it's his research, followed by the other people that have contributed. The date of the study. Okay, so authors, date, that's the title of the journal article. Okay, so context, dependent memory, etc. Okay, that's the journal. That's these bits then are the sort of volume and the page numbers. Okay, so that's the volume, that's the issue number, and those are the pages. So it's similar, but there's a bit more information. So just to be clear, okay, authors, date, title of the journal article, okay, the journal it's come from, the volume, okay, of the journal, the issue number of the journal, and the page numbers. Okay, and that's how you reference. So what I'd like you to do today is to sort of have a look at this in a bit more detail, read through the stuff that I'm going to send you, have a look at Milgram's research, and then answer the sort of questions that follow. Okay, and then the next lesson is going to be on peer review, okay, which would follow the publication of the journal. Okay, thank you.